It's Sunday, and I want to share with you how I came to know the Lord so that you can do some effective witnessing. And the process that I use, which I found to be very effective in getting people to open up to me, and also the method that Lieutenant in the Air Force used in the ministry of the Navigators when he led me to Christ. First of all, he was praying. The Navigators have a thing, one man a day, and I was that man that day, and he was praying that, God would lead him to the right person to witness to. And it just so happens at that time, I was thinking about the perennial questions of life. These are the most important questions that everybody asks himself at some time. Is there a God? How can we know if there is a God? Is there absolute right and wrong? Will there be life after we die? Is there a heaven? Is there a God? How can we know if there's a God? So these are questions that philosophers and people have tried to answer all through the ages. I was thinking about those things. And as you can see here on this chart, don't let this chart blow you away. I'm going to explain it real simple. But I have here the perennial questions. Okay? They can be answered for the most part, 99% of the time, by one of these five worldviews. Okay? And I had one, but it was also exposed to others. Okay? Now, before we go any further, let me just share this with you. God has all knowledge. Okay? He's omniscient. He knows everything. He doesn't have an afterthought. There isn't something he hasn't thought about or considered. All you have to do is look at creations. Every now and then I watch the Discovery Channel, and they show these fish that are hundreds of yards under the ocean, and the way they're made and how they live and how they accommodate themselves to their environment and all that, and all the creatures. And I just know, where there's a beautiful design, there must be a beautiful designer. Where there's a beautiful creation, there must therefore be a beautiful creator. When I'm seeing that and doing that, what am I doing? I'm using logic. That logic comes from God. God is an intelligent, logical, in fact, you can name, as I put God up here at the top, all his various attributes. He's omniscient, he's omnipotent, he's holy completely, he has no flaw, he's immutable, he's doesn't need anything. And you got all these characteristics of God. Okay, now, let's say that this kind of not a very nice circle, but this in the blue is everything that God knows. How much of that do you know right now? Okay, so if we're honest with ourselves, we could probably put a little dot there. But God knows everything. But here's the thing. God communicates to those who listen. And he has a method of communicating. In fact, as I have learned over the years, a thing called prolegomena. And one of the things is prolegomena is your presuppositions as to why you believe what you believe. And God has communicated to us through language. Okay? Today, through the Bible, through grammar, through context, through historical settings. He communicates to us. He speaks to us. But he didn't tell us everything. And that's what I want you to understand. I got this line here. See this red line that goes across the middle? Miss Elsie used to tell me that's called the line of demarcation. Everything above that line, God who is infinite, we who are finite, everything above the line is unknowable in this life. We'll come to know it when we get to heaven. But it's unknowable in this life. So all those things God has reserved for himself. When is Jesus going to come back? Nobody knows the day or the hour. God has reserved that for himself. But there are things that are knowable. Okay? And those things that are knowable, we discover. We don't invent. We simply discover by means of revelation and reason. And so I'm thinking about these things, okay? And something just bit me on my leg. I got bit on the back last week by a spider. Golly, it hurt. But anyway, so I'm thinking about all these things. And he stops and picks me up and he begins to explain things to me. So when I go and witness to somebody, I always ask them certain questions. Do you believe that there's a God? Do you believe there's one God or many gods or no God? Okay. Now normally a person will answer the question in one of these 4 ways here. Either he's agnostic. I was not agnostic, but agnostic is somebody that's not going to believe. You can show them everything, but they're just not going to believe. Or he may be a skeptic, like Doubting Thomas. He was skeptical. Okay, you're going to have to show me something to make me believe. And then you have those that are very naive, fideism, which they say, well, we got to just believe everything, without really using logic or reason to discover what was true. And then there's realism. Okay, now realism, when you get into the realm of what's called epistemology, let me move my chair out of the way here. I hope you can see this. Epistemology is how you can know anything. And you have to come to this conclusion. Truth is knowable. God communicates to man who listens his truth. It's knowable, but, and here's where you got to be very careful, truth is absolute and it corresponds to reality. Okay? President Trump is the president of everybody in the United States. Okay? That is a true statement and it corresponds to reality. When people say that Trump is not my president, they're in denial of reality and they have entered into the realm of relativism. Relativism says what's true for you is not true for me. And this gender transitional thing where men become women and women become men, that's what they're doing. They're relativists. And what they want you to do is agree with their relativism. But relativism is a contradiction in terms. Okay? It cannot be false and true at the same time. So, now I was not a relativist, but I did understand basic truth. What's true is true. A relative say what may be true for you may not be true for me in a given place or given time. But truth, that Jesus came and was born in a manger, is absolute truth. So I have somebody, is Jesus God? That's a statement that needs to correspond to truth. How do I know that? Because the Bible tells me that. That's revelational truth. Okay? So truth is absolute, but it has to correspond to reality. It's also knowable. We can know truth by means of revelation or reason, or what's called deduction, logical deduction. 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, that's logical deduction. Okay, that's true for everybody. It's not just true for me. So truth always has to correspond to reality. Reality is in the realm of what they call metaphysics. That's where you get different worldviews. What is real? Okay, now let me just go from the bottom up here. An atheist would believe that there is no God, there is no afterlife. This life is all there is. And then when I was a teenager, they said a Schlitz beer commercial says you only go around once in life, so grab all the gusto you can to try to get people drinking. The polytheists, they believe that there are many gods, okay? And Mormons believe that. Greek mythology believes that. The pantheists, well, they believe that everything is God, okay? And God is one and one is all, and we are all one with God. Okay, those are the tree huggers. Theism is what many of our founding fathers in America were. They believe in God, one God, but he's off. He just kind of got the ball rolling and he went off. He left man to his own affair. He's not personally involved in what we do. And then there's theism. That's the belief in one God, three persons. Now, the people that hold to theism are three different groups. Christians, Jews, and believe it or not, Muslims. Okay, they believe in three. Okay, although their identification of who God is varies. Christians believe that Jesus is God. Jews are still waiting for their Redeemer. Okay, and Muslims, they believe Muhammad, and truly Islam recognizes God the Father, but in a very different way. Okay, obviously, pantheists think everything's God, polytheists have many gods, and atheists don't believe in any God at all. Okay, so I'm walking down the street. I've been exposed to all these things. I'm not an agnostic. I'm not a skeptic. I certainly don't believe in everything. I was pretty much a realist. Now, a realist, this is in red and you probably can't see it. There's different ways of learning truth. Okay, so that modern day scientists believe that we learn through our five senses. Okay, and we do learn some things, but we don't learn all things. Now, the idealist, he thinks, therefore he is. He thinks he can only learn through your mind. Okay, Descartes. I think, therefore I am. And then you have supernaturalism. Okay, so you got three different thoughts of how supernaturalism believes that you can learn truth resides beside just the physical realm. Okay, in the spiritual realm. The Christian believes all three. Okay, now I'm walking down the street. I was raised Catholic, but I've also was exposed to Protestantism through my mother's side. And because all my aunts were married to ministers. And so I heard both sides. I understood what Catholic dogma was, and I understand that they believe that you go to heaven based on the sacramental system. It's a man's performance system. Okay, so I'm thinking about these perennial questions of life, and I'm walking down the street here, believe it or not, in San Antonio. This lieutenant in the Air Force felt compelled at that moment, because they have a thing where they witness to one person a day. I was the man that day. He pulled over and invited me to a Bible study. I went. I'm already thinking about the perennial questions of life, but Satan is a liar. And Satan is trying to distort the truth that I knew. Okay, and I also had a lot of bad thinking. Okay, and so he had to explain things to me in a way that was logical, that was real, that made sense to me. Okay, and I was using all three methods of learning. It's called epistemology. And I'm a finite creature trying to look to God, who's infinite, knows everything, to try to give me answers in my finite realm with my limited thinking. And man, did I get blown away. And I remember I was in the Bible study, and here we were. Now, this is during a time where there was a lot of segregation in the military and in the country. And in this big conference room were a lot of GIs, a lot of soldiers, all male, no female, just all men. And you had all kind of men in there. You had blacks, Asians, whites, Hispanics, all mixed up together, sitting with one another and everything. So that made an impression on me. And when they started to speak and people were asking questions and answers, I noticed something, that all these people had something in common. They were agreeable, they were unified, they had love one for another. Okay, that made an impression on me in a supernatural way. What they said to me in a realistic way made a lot of sense to me. Okay? And I understood that what they were saying corresponded to the truth that I knew. So then he took me into a little room and he began to share the gospel with me. And he began to answer those questions that I had. Is there a God? Yes. Is there life after death? Yes. Is there absolute morality and absolute truth? Yes. Am I a sinner? And he drew a little bridge plan. And he showed me on one side and God on the other. And he did that to show the distinction that I was from where God was. God was holy and just. I'm a sinner and unjust. I'm finite. God is infinite. Okay? I'm mutable. God is immutable. Okay? And he's showing me the difference in attributes. Some that I shared with God and others that I did not. Then he said that Jesus came in the form of, it was born in the manger by a virgin, so that the sin nature, which passes on through the Father, doesn't go to him. So he was born without a sin nature. He lived, he ministered for a number of years, then he went to the cross for a purpose. He came, his purpose was to die. See, now that was totally unlike my thinking in Catholicism, because when I saw them taking Jesus to the cross and whipping him and all that, if I was there, I would have probably intervened. At least that was my thinking. I didn't recognize that he was doing the very thing he was sent for. Jesus says, I've come to be a ransom, and a ransom for many. I came to die, not to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. Jesus, who had no sin, became sin on our behalf. And so he showed me, even though I was finite and I was a sinner, and God was holy and just, born as a human, and then took on the God-man Christ. Fully human, fully God, died on the cross for me to satisfy God's justice because he's holy, which is one of his attributes. Now, I didn't understand everything, but I understood some of those things. And those things were reasonable, they were logical, and they corresponded to truth. Those things, I was not agnostic about it. I was not skeptical about it. I didn't believe everything, but I believed those things that made sense to me. And God opened my eyes to it. So when I go witness to people, I use it really simple. I start off with the perennial questions of life. Do you believe there's a God? How can you know? Do you believe there's absolute right and wrong? Where does truth come from? Where do laws come from? If human-made laws, then those laws are arbitrary. They're always changing, which is what's happening in our country. But if God made the laws, they're fixed. Okay, so I ask those kind of questions. That leads me to see whether they are agnostic, skeptic, if they believe everything, or they're realists. That leads me to the next direction. What worldview are they answering questions from? Are they answering like an atheist, a polytheist, a pantheist, a deist? Or do they have? And I find that most people in the country are theists. But they mix other worldviews in there. I also try to help them to understand that the big test in this world is truth versus lies. And we live in a time when truth has become very relative. And truth cannot be relative. That's a contradiction in terms. Okay? So it's an effective way of listening. All you have to do, let me show you simple homework. Go in your phone and look up the perennial questions of life. Write them down. There's only so many of them. Then, right next to that, in a column, write down how these people would answer that. Then go to the next step and find out what worldview they are. And then you have a method, logical method and process by which to witness to them effectively. You know, a lot of people share the gospel with me before Lieutenant Paul Johnson did. They just didn't do it effectively. They didn't do it logically in a way that I could grab it the way God developed communication semantics, okay? They didn't develop in a way that I could grab it by faith. We're justified by what? By faith. Faith comes first, then the salvation, okay? Some people try to mix it backwards, and it's not true. Okay, like only the elect are saved, and that isn't true at all. God, whom God foreknew, he predestined for all men to be saved. Okay? And in that process, you got to exercise faith, and then you can be saved. Now, that's a whole nother subject in its own, but there's a great message by Dr. Norman Geisler, one of my seminary professors, that you can see on YouTube. It's called Why I'm Not a Calvinist. And I am not a Calvinist. I believe that people have a volitional choice. I don't believe that people are so eradicated at the fall that they can't make reasonable, logical thinking assertions. And if you'll see that even after the fall, Adam and Eve were still talking to God. I mean, that didn't cut their ability to. They still understood what God was saying. Okay, so you can know some things, but not everything. Okay, and the things that we don't know, then we need revelation, the Holy Spirit's help in understanding those things. You want to be an effective witness? You got to know these things, especially today, because I'm telling you, it's so screwed up, and they're thinking with so many ideas and thoughts, especially with the internet floating around. Okay, God bless you all. Have a great rest of Sunday. Bye-bye.